Okay, hello everybody. So for this month's Fearless Fridays, I'm here with Joana Ferreira, someone who's actually in the same country as me for a change, which is nice. We're just chatting about how nice the weather's been this week. So Joanna, let's dive straight in, and I'd love for you to tell us what you were doing before and what you're doing now.
Great, cool. Thanks for having me. Yes, my name is Joanna. I'm originally from Portugal, but I live in the UK. And previously, I was working at a digital marketing agency. I was running the marketing department there, and I was also working at the same time for a tech company in London. So, splitting my time between Manchester and London and running the marketing strategy at both companies. And now what I do is not dramatically dissimilar. I'm still in marketing, but I work for myself now. I'm a freelancer, and instead of working for big corporations that can afford a massive agency, I work with small businesses, independents. I also have become a part-time lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University, so I'm getting into teaching and training as well, which is a new thing for me.
Great. Well, that sounds interesting to dig into. Before we even get to sort of the new stuff and the transition, what was the setup before then? You were working part time. How did that work? That sounds quite unusual to be doing the two jobs at the same time.
Yeah, so they were both full time. So the tech company was the parent company,
Okay.
and they owned the agency. Um, so I originally started working at the agency, and that was back in 2012. This is an agency in Manchester who, at the time, was an independent agency. Then they were bought by this tech company in London. And some of the teams merged, some transitioned to the new company. So there was a time of change. And it ended up being that the marketing department, the internal marketing department, which is the one that I led, was almost the same team for both companies, really. So instead of having one team in one and one in the other, it was just one overall team, with me spending half of my time in London and half of my time in Manchester. So a lot of traveling,
Mm.
and a lot of, I guess, multitasking is the key word.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so what was it that led you to decide that, hang on a second, I'm actually gonna, take my skills, go freelance, work with a different kind of clients?
Um, a lot of different things. I suppose the biggest motivator for me was the fact that being having to travel from London to Manchester every week. So I was spending 3 days in London, 2 days in Manchester, and at the time I was living in Stoke-on-Trent. So I was pretty much traveling across the
Mm.
country every single week, multiple times. It was very tiring. And of course, it means, you can't really have much of a social life, and even things like planning when you're going to go to the gym, you need a whole schedule just for that. So it was a kind of, life was work and work was life, and that's not really how I like to live my life. Apart from that, it was also very kind of corporate environment, and very demanding, very long hours, a lot of long meetings, a lot of conversations before we actually made any real decisions. And for my style of working, I just prefer to get stuck in with things, do things, be creative, and just especially because I work in digital marketing, I like to experiment, try different things, and see if it works. And that was something that I was missing a little bit. And then, of course, when you work for an agency, the clients that you work with are bigger companies that can afford an agency. And I always wanted in my heart to work with small businesses that need support, but they haven't got the budget to hire an agency. And so that was always in the back of my mind
Mm.
eventually, to be able to do that.
Okay, so that all kind of built up. Was there a particular trigger that led you to go now as the time, or was it just sort of felt
Yeah,
natural?
yeah. It was actually, it literally happened in a split moment from one day to the next. I'd been building up in my head that the time we were reaching that time when I wanted to go out on my own, but I hadn't quite figured out when, how, how that was all going to work out. And I think I'd just been having a really tough week. It was one of those weeks where I was in the office until late in the evening and spending 4 hours in a meeting and feeling like we still needed another meeting after that to finally get things going. Staying in a hotel, and when I went to check in, they'd overbooked me, so they had to move me to a different hotel. And it was just one thing after another. And it was one evening after dinner when I just said, okay, this is it. I'm going to go in tomorrow. And I'm going to hand in my notice. And that was it. And then it happened to be at the end of 2017. So I gave myself until the end of the year. And then I took a couple of months off to just clear my head and travel and then start my new business.
Okay, so you hadn't done anything in the meantime to prepare? You hadn't sort of seen if you could work freelance with them or built up any client base? No.
No, it was quite, sometimes when you know, you know. And I think that was, I just had this moment and I said, I just need to go out on my own. And I didn't want to, because my work was so intense and high pressured, I didn't want to also add anything else onto my plate by now planning this new business venture that I was going to go into. I wanted to give myself some time off and then do it, which I know that's not how everyone would do it, but for me, that's how I felt the most comfortable.
Yeah, I think there are the two schools of thought, aren't there? There's sort of go cold turkey and then you have the energy and time and so on to actually focus on it, or the safer option, I suppose, is to build it alongside. But if you're already almost burnt out from the travel and the stress and so on, it probably isn't the best idea to add something on. Exactly. Okay, so what were the challenges that you faced once you'd made that decision? Sounds pretty simple. I'm going to go off and take some time off. What sort of obstacles did you come across?
I think the first one that I came across was people, because I wasn't scared when I made that decision, and then suddenly people were scared for me. And then you're kind of like, well, why are you scared? Because I'm not scared. But then you start thinking, should I be scared? And then that's when the worry starts to creep in. So I had a bit of that. And then I did decide that in January of 2018, I was going to completely do nothing. I needed to clear my head. I needed to kind of give myself some time. And that was the biggest challenge for me, actually, because I'd been moving at such a fast pace. I'd been constantly busy for 5-6 years, traveling and having a million things to do every day. And suddenly I had nothing to do. And that was really challenging. That was probably my biggest challenge. But then after that, it was just about figuring it out, because I think when you're employed and you're used to having all the HR and the finance stuff handled for you, suddenly that's quite a new world. So this was a big sort of learning curve for me. And then also just figuring out, well, how am I going to find my new clients? How am I going to sell myself? How do I represent myself? What do I call myself now? What's my job title? All these different things. But I think I kind of had a really good support system and a lot of help as well from communities and things like that. And I think once you lean on them, everything becomes a little bit easier, because you start to realize everyone's been through this journey, so we can do it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because as you said, the last thing you were talking about was sort of the basics of setting up a business. How do I do this? And it's all being managed by someone else. But the first 2 points were so interesting. The fact that you're getting used to doing nothing, which is exactly what we want. But as you say, we're so used to this sort of busy hustle. And even as sort of freelancers, entrepreneurs, we're almost told by social media that we should be doing that anyway. So it can be quite difficult. I was just out in the park this afternoon. I was a bit tired. I did have my notebook and pen with me, and I was like, I've got to do something. I was like, no, I'm tired. I'm just going to enjoy the sun. Tomorrow's going to be rainy, and it's so difficult even just for an hour or two. And I love what you said, the first point as well. It's so telling that, you felt this was the right thing for you, and yet the people in your immediate environment, I think it's often, their own insecurities. They maybe had some idea of doing that, but they're a little bit scared. They haven't really thought about it. And ultimately, hopefully, these people are people who care about you, so they want the best for you, and they're just sort of well-intentioned in their concern for you. But that can be quite difficult if you're already a little bit unsure, or even, as you said, if you're actually feeling sure and people are then bringing you down by introducing doubts that you didn't even have.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It is well intentioned, but sometimes it only adds to a fear that you don't really need at the time. But it also puts things into reality as well, because you don't want to step into something completely blind. And it's great to hear other people's point of view, but I think it's really important, especially when we work for ourselves, is to have a very strong opinion or direct sense of direction, so that you can listen to other people's opinions but not be so influenced by them that you end up doing something that isn't true to yourself, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it. Listen to what they have to say, take it as an opinion as it is, and make sure you have considered that aspect. And then,
Yeah.
as you say, the more clarity and conviction you have about your own path, which some people don't have. It sounds like you already kind of knew what you wanted to do. Some people don't have that clarity yet, and that's the time when I always suggest incubate yourself a little bit, get away from those people who
Yeah.
are, doubting, and meet new
Yeah.
people. So in terms of support, it sounded like, as you mentioned there briefly, a community of people. Can you tell us more about the support networks you found online, offline, friends, strangers?
Yeah, so, well, when I started freelancing, I didn't really know any other freelancers because I'd been employed for many years and all my friends from work were also employed. So it was kind of a new world for me. And I decided, well, I'm a digital marketing person. Social media is what I do. So I went on social media and started looking for different communities and Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, and events as well in and around Manchester, where I could meet other people. And actually, I discovered that there's this whole massive world out there and this massive community of really supportive people who are also freelancing and are very much supportive of this community growing. And it doesn't feel like a competitive world. It feels almost like a community. Yeah. So I signed up to loads of Facebook groups, and I attended a couple of events, and just kind of got to know a few people and people that I felt an immediate kind of trusting relationship with. And then I just asked loads of questions. How do you do this? How do you do that? And everyone that I came across was really open and willing to share their experiences, good and bad, willing to give advice without asking for anything in return, which for me was a whole new world because I'd come from quite a corporate environment where you don't do anything for free, and it's quite competitive, and you don't want to help someone else because then you might end up losing out. So this was an eye opener in a very, very positive way. And even today, people that I met at the very beginning of my freelance career, I still keep in touch with them all the time. I've ended up working with some of them or recommending them when I'm not the right fit, or they've recommended me when they're not the right fit. And I think that's probably what helped me the most in terms of figuring out how to go about being self-employed. And then obviously, apart from that, friends and family, but especially family, have all been super, super supportive, to the point where I'm even surprised at how supportive they are, because I thought they would have been thinking I was crazy. But actually, a lot of them are like, yeah, you can do this. And, being very proud and very, very positive.
That's amazing to hear that from your family, and also that you had that really positive experience. I mean, I've felt the same. It sounds like the community gave you both kind of the emotional support you needed to reassure you, and also concrete tips, and even potentially client exchanges, which is fantastic. And what would you say is the best part then of what you're doing now? And maybe talk a little bit, if you can, in a moment about the teaching piece, because we haven't covered that, like how that came about, and how you're blending that with your consulting as well.
Yeah, the teacher. Well, actually, that almost answers two questions, because one of the things I love the most is the freedom to choose what I work on. Obviously, we have to be realistic in that we have to have enough work coming in so that we can pay the bills and all of this stuff. But generally speaking, I've been able to work on projects that I really enjoy, and for clients that I really feel we create almost a friendship rather than a client and supplier relationship. But apart from that, I'd had in the back of my mind that I love training. In my previous role, I was a manager, and I got to work with graduates and apprentices and really nurture them from the very beginning of their career and watch them grow. And that was something that I really enjoyed. And I'd always thought, could I get into training or teaching or something? And I thought, well, now that I'm a freelancer, I've actually got time and freedom to be able to try and see if this works, which you can't do that when you've got a full-time job because it's not feasible. So so I approached, I did a guest lecture at the University of Staffordshire because I'd had a few connections there and they invited me to do a lecture. And then I posted that on LinkedIn, and then someone from Wolverhampton University got in touch because they saw the post and they said, can you do the same lecture for us? So I was like, yes, of course. So off I went to Wolverhampton, and then I said, well, I wonder if any universities in Manchester would be interested. And I did study at Manchester Metropolitan. I did my master's there. So I still had, even though it was 7-8 years ago, I still had a few people on my LinkedIn, and I still had kept in touch with a few of the lecturers. So I just got in touch and asked if they'd be interested, and they were. And I had the skills that they needed because digital marketing is obviously very fast paced. And when you're trying to teach it, you've also got to be doing it so that you can teach the most up-to-date practice. And so they thought that I had those skills. And so I started with a couple of different units, and then it's grown and grown. And now I'm doing about four units, and I've been doing marking, which is a new thing for me. And I've even taught at a postgrad level as well. So yeah, it was something that I had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to explore it, but I'd never done anything about it. But then being able to, while freelancing, having the freedom to say, yeah, I want to spend some time, invest my time trying to pursue this avenue. And then it worked out really well. So now I'm kind of almost 50-50 teaching and freelancing.
Amazing. It sounds like that happened so organically. As you said, you just did the one lecture and then someone else came to you. So very fortunate, but also, as you said, in-demand skills and really nice complementary fit really with the work that you're doing anyway, which is great, but also different approach, different skills that you're using as well.
Oh yeah, it's very, very different, but also really enjoyable because it is very different to what I do, even though it's the same industry, but teaching to a group of students is very different than, freelancing for a business. So it is really enjoyable, and I'm the kind of person that I love variety. So being able to have this much variety is really exciting.
Okay, so freedom and variety sounds like are two of the key elements. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. And then what advice would you give to someone maybe who's in a similar situation to you, having quite sort of a heavy, maybe a little bit sick of the corporate meetings and all that, or having, logistical issues with commutes and that kind of thing? What would you encourage them to do? Or what words of wisdom could you share?
Well, I always say that I always follow my gut. If it doesn't feel right, then I try to fix it. And if it feels like this is the right thing for you, then I always go with it. And I try not to listen too much to the people that might be doubting that this is a wrong choice. So for me, my advice is always follow your gut, follow your instincts, because they're usually right. I'm very lucky that I had some savings that I could afford to leave the job without having an immediate client and be able to take a couple of months off. Obviously, not everyone is in that position. So, of course, I wouldn't say leave your job tomorrow if you haven't got enough savings, So everyone's different. But for me, follow your gut, trust your instincts. If it feels right for you, then it's right for you. And everyone else is different. So if you feel it's right for you, you don't need to listen to anyone who's doubting you.
Yeah, I love that. And just, I don't know if you can give advice on this, but how do you know if it feels right for you? Because I think a lot of us aren't so in touch with our intuition. I found that too when I quit. That was my sort of first ever really listening to my gut and intuition rather than sort of the intellectual, logical side of my brain. So any thoughts on, if you're not so in touch with that, what was it that made you so sure? How could you connect to that feeling that it was right for you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think it had been on my mind for such a long time that I needed to change. I needed to change. I wanted to do this, and there were so many things that I thought I want to do. I wish I could. And I think if your mind is telling you, I wish I could, then something is wrong, something's missing.
Mm.
And that's when you need to start paying attention and say, well, why can't I do this? What's stopping me? And what do I need to do to be able to do this? And one of my things was, oh, I wish I could work. I wish I had time to learn more about training and teaching. Oh, I wish I could work with smaller businesses. I wish I had more time to write because I love writing, but I didn't have enough time for it. I wish I had more time. And then I'm like, why do I wish these things that are so within reach, but they feel so out of reach right now? And how can I make them, come a bit closer within reach so I can finally do them? And I think it was just time. I think it had been going on for such a long time. Eventually, I think I just had this sense, well, this is it. This is my time. I'm not sure how everyone else would. I think we're all so different. Everyone's got their own inner voice, I suppose. But also, I think having someone to talk to, someone to talk to that you can say these things to, and they can be, well, why don't you? Why don't you do this? So having someone who's that strong, who can say to you, well, what's stopping you? Why aren't you doing it then? Because I think sometimes we need that. We need that one person who just says, why are you dreaming? Why aren't you doing it?
And that's like that why don't you could come from a coach, but it could also come from just a random in a bar, which has happened to me many times. So, just some enlightened person has sort of asked me, I think someone at lunch was just like, why don't you travel to South America? Why don't you write a book? I'm like, oh, yeah. I could actually do this.
Yeah, sometimes it will be just some stranger on a train or something. It doesn't have to be your best friend, because sometimes your best friend can also, they know you so well, they almost mirror your own fears. Whereas a complete stranger doesn't know you. And if you say to them, oh, I wish I had more time to write, they'll be like, well, why don't you have time to write? Why are you working so many hours? Why don't you quit your job, and why don't you find something that, that gives you the time? And then you think, well, yeah, why don't I? And then maybe that sparks a little something.
So simple. It's a bit the emperor's new clothes, isn't it? Someone just has to point out that, hang on a second, you don't have to keep doing what you're doing. But I love that, as you said, we are all different. But I think that I wish I could is something that so many of us, and it can happen still now. I find myself sometimes thinking, oh, I wish I could go there or do that. And like, oh, I've sort of lost sight again of the fact that I can keep changing things up if I want to. And I think that's such a concrete thing for people to latch onto if they're finding themselves, if you watching are finding yourself asking or saying, I wish I could do this, I wish I could that, then exactly as you said, Joanna, reframing that and thinking, okay, how could I make it possible to, what could I change, and is it really important to me? And if it's been something nagging at you for years, probably it's something that is worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I think everyone's got a different system, and some people like to write things down or keep a journal. At the time, I was spending a lot of time traveling, and I get really travel sick, so I couldn't work while I was on the train, which gave me a lot of time to think. And I think that was my time that I used to reflect on, planning and things like that. But, that's the time that I gave myself to think about these kinds of things. But if you don't have a 2-hour train journey from Manchester to London to think about life, then maybe just keeping a journal or keeping a list of things that you want to achieve, and then saying, well, what's stopping me? And not the big things like, something that seems completely out of reach, but small things like having more time with the family, having more time to travel, going on weekend trips, and like things like that are within reach, but for some of us feel almost impossible because the busy lives that we lead.
Yeah, that's great advice as well. Starting small is always good, and there are so many things you can do even at that level, as you said. Spend a bit more time with the family, go to the gym more often, whatever it is. So great advice. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for sharing a bit of your story and your insights. So where can we find you if someone wants to find out more about your digital marketing, or perhaps there's a university watching and they'd like to get you involved in their lecture?
Great. Well, I've got a website. It's jvf.marketing. because my business is JVF Marketing. I'm also on Twitter. I'm at Joanna Marketing, and I'm on Instagram at Joanna V Marketing. So any one of those, or on LinkedIn as Joana Vega Ferreira.
Perfect, and I'll include all those links as well. Well, thank you so much, Joanna. Such a pleasure and lots of fantastic insights. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. It was nice to talk to you.